Jim Joyce.
There we are.
Man. Next Wednesday, come and go. You jumped the gun. This is the first time I let you record it because I'm in Florence visiting my older one, and the Wi-Fi kind of sucks, and I'm off of 4G. So let's see if it's gonna actually. It looks like I'm recording locally too. So let's see. How's your week? We missed our Monday.
Awesome.
Date.
You were like in slow motion with the Wi-Fi was coming in. You're moving in. So week is going well. The week is going well. I did a 5K run last night, with the little Health Beacon team.
Oh, awesome.
So I don't run that much, so that was kind of a nice little treat. Feel kind of energized and like healthy.
That's fantastic. You know what? I'm gonna tell Marina that we need to up it. We do 3.5K every morning, right? It's like day 270 or something like that. I don't know. She's keeping track.
I'm such a nut, despite not running regularly. I mean, I try to do other workouts, but like I don't run. And and then I went off with the fast crew at the beginning, and I was like, sucking wind.
Always about a pace. Always about pacing yourself.
Have you noticed? Yeah, I have 2 gears in life, right?
I know, on or off. I gotcha. I was gonna say on that note, but I don't know on that which note. But I was gonna let our guest in. He just entered in.
Awesome.
So I'm gonna let Kal in. Let's see. So Kal is the CEO of BrightInsight, and let's see. I know he texted us about the sound nearby in the household or something, but
there's a whole construction site out front. As long as you guys, I can try to ignore it. As long as you guys aren't hearing it.
We can't hear, and we got 3 entrepreneurs here, and that was going to be my comment. Never give up, never surrender, just plow ahead. So
yes,
here we are. We can't hear anything at all, and neither can our guests. So
nice to meet you, Kal.
Nice to meet you as well, James. Yeah.
And we, I think you and I crossed paths at one of those events, kind of in passing somewhere in the digital health arena. And I think when I was still with my Pharma hat on, with your team, we've spoken a while back, but in any case, pleasure to have you. And for millions of viewers, listeners, take us on a journey of who is Kal Patel. You can start in childhood, at birth, fast forward, however you want to play.
According to the interwebs, you're incredibly successful. So congratulations, but over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. It's a real pleasure and honor to connect with you guys as well. So thanks for that. Gosh, usually you throw out a fun question. I mean, that might take up the whole 60 minutes we have, love to talk about myself.
FYI, we try to do it in like 35 to 45, but it is our show, so we can go longer.
That's the beauty of being an entrepreneur. It's your show.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Right.
Except nobody actually listens to you. It's just in my case. But.
We're listening.
Look, happy to sort of give you the short version, and you guys double click me wherever seems more interesting. But the quick background on myself: born in India, immigrant kid. Grew up in Chicago, and ended up really falling in love with economics and chemistry because I had 2 awesome teachers in high school that did that, and so I'm fortunate to end up at the University of Chicago, studied econ and some chem, and was going to go straight to med school and do research, and sort of got in and got the opportunity to, because of the econ degree, to go do a little bit of consulting. So I ended up at Boston Consulting Group, and that really fundamentally changed what I thought I wanted to do with my professional career, and just sort of saw the opportunity for impact at scale versus impact of one patient at a time. And that's not meant to be judgmental at all. Just for me personally, just sort of really resonated. And so then when it came time to actually go to medical school or not, again, at that point, that sort of the choice of just sticking with the business route. But you know what, actually, I just sort of had this feeling in my gut that I will be better at it and will get more satisfaction out of it in the long run to go ahead and take that, very unique opportunity to go to medical school. So did an MD MBA and 5 more years of BCG and the Boston Consulting Group in US and Europe, working across healthcare. And that was just amazing learning curve and impact curve. And then took that to industry. I was at Novartis in
Okay.
different sales and marketing sort of oriented roles in the U.S. pharma business, and then and through that process, fell in love with California because I spent a year in Cali for Novartis and felt the deep desire to need to live out here in the sunshine instead of the dreary winters of Chicago that I'd spent 30 years plus doing. And so was fortunate enough to end up at Amgen and did three very different things at Amgen, right? So sort of felt like I had three careers even at Amgen. I was head of corporate strategy. Then I was global marketing lead for one of their main drugs, Enbrel. And then I founded and led what we called Amgen Digital Health. So one of the early really digitally focused groups within big pharma and medtech is about a decade ago, right before this whole chief digital officer kind of concept even existed in our industry and all the digital COEs and stuff we have today. And we're really focused on how do we leverage technology and digital in particular to improve the real world performance of our drugs, right? So we're just really thinking about, are patients getting appropriately diagnosed? Can we help do that at scale and more effectively? Can we help match the right patient to the right therapy? Can we support patients and physicians once they're on therapy, right? Depending on the illness and the therapy, is it personalized drug dosing? Is it personalized adherence? Is it symptom tracking? Disease progression and so forth, right? So real world evidence. So I sort of got into all that, and that just, again, another big sort of passion pivot, if you will. It's just like, it was just so, to me anyway, it's so obvious to me that like what was holding back the impact of digital and technology was not the technology. It was how hard it is to implement that and scale it within healthcare, right? And so I was like, well, maybe I can help do that, because notice in my background, I'm not an engineer. I've never taken an engineering class in my life. I can't do the most basic coding thing that like my 5-year-old can do on Scratch Junior or whatever. Like, and yet,
you mean you don't use no code in every day? No code.
Nothing. So, yet I'm helping, build and lead a software company because it's not to downplay the importance of the software and technology by any means, but where I can help personally was how do you apply that successfully, right? How do you take this great technology that's being developed and successfully implement and drive impact through that? And so that really became my passion about a decade ago. And so went down the entrepreneurial route, was a doctor in Japan as chief commercial officer. They were doing their Series B in the telemedicine space. And then that parlayed ultimately into, what's now BrightInsight. And so that's sort of the journey for you guys.
Man, awesome. That's so much to double click on. I hope we have enough of the hour. But I'm actually curious to go back all the way to kind of the consulting days, right? Like obviously you kind of zoom in and out with different clients, the crazy ass travel, the crazy hours, but then many times you don't see a lot of these to come to fruition, right? Like you present 110 slides or 10 slides and you kind of leave it with the operational side because it's up to that individual company or team to implement. So I'm curious kind of the lessons learned and how long you did that at the consulting component of it, and what was the actual trigger to get into kind of the Novartis or the Amgens and within the company.
Happy to do that. And look, a lot of, like many things in life, a lot of the ahas and the insights come afterwards. You're like, I wish I knew that when I was there. So look, so I spent a total of 7 years, 2 before grad school and 5 after, and it was tremendous. Some of the best people in my life. I mean, I'm still close friends. In fact, we have a Zoom reunion with like the 10 of us that started together in 1997 out of college. Like I've been to everyone's weddings and vice versa. Like we're good friends. We're again, all this chat, even though we're spread out all over the world. So some of the best people I've ever met in my life were at BCG and formative years there, but also from a learning perspective, right? Like I really had no idea what I was doing. And so the mentorship, apprenticeship model there is amazing. And I think, look, we drove very meaningful and real insights for our customers, for our clients. And looking on the other side, I've worked with all of them, right? I've worked with BCG, McKinsey, Bain, Deloitte, et cetera, right? So clearly I've made the choice to hire folks as well because they absolutely bring value. But I think back to the experience, I love your comment about the 110 versus 10 slides. If I had to do it over again, I don't think any consulting deck should ever go beyond 10 slides because as a client, I've never paid attention. If you haven't gotten me massively convinced by the 10th slide on what the right answer is, then you're not going to, right? Like that point, we got to be talking about, okay, like how do we, to your other point, make this real, right? Like I know the answer. Now I'm just thinking about how hard it is to implement the answer, right? So if you go back to my point around technology and healthcare, right? That's like sort of the equivalent of like, after 10 slides, the technology works.
Right.
Now talking about how do I actually implement and drive real world impact, like that's the actual
operationalize it, touch the consumers, customers.
Right? And so in retrospect, that was the same thing. It's like, I don't know why I ever stayed up till 2 a.m. working on an appendix, or whatever it is, because
it's funny. I was in a presentation the other day, and so I've been in the wild as an entrepreneur for too many years now at this stage, and I was in a presentation I had to sit through for almost like politeness. I had to sit through a long slide deck, and I from a consultancy firm, and it's incredibly professional and great people, love them all to death. But I was like, I don't have to do that anymore. so I didn't have any of this. I didn't have any of the skills of like pretending, like how do I pretend I'm awake and listening? Because I had such good skills when I was inside big pharma. I was so good at that. Like, well, I wasn't great at it, but I was pretending I was interested in staying with it. But my skills are gone. I can't. I'm like, I'm out of here. I can't do this. I can't do this.
With that said, look, part of the training also happens on that, right? Like in those first couple of years, if we never got past the first 10 slides, and none of the work I did ever got presented to, so I appreciate if we never got to slide 48 because of the day, like I did that analysis, So
what's amazing though, I just wonder about your just jumping off on like on the. That I love, people that have your kind of training, like when you were, obviously when you're younger and you were stepping into it, like when I hire from these Accentures, I haven't hired anyone from BCG, but I would in a heartbeat, is that the quality of training, right? Like the quality of mentorship and training is just amazing. I feel like there's a whole generation of people that don't get that now because they kind of move through, the entrepreneurial world or something, or a different kind of freelancer world.
It is a bit different. I mean, look, we have folks in our company at BrightInsight that come from, all the firms that we just mentioned, or chief growth officers from, as a partner at Boston Consulting Group. Like, the talent and the training of that talent, both their ability to recruit and then train that talent is world class. But it's part of what is needed to be successful, right? It's not the only thing that's needed to be successful, right? And so to your point, Eugene, around the operational side, right? That is extremely hard, and at least in my experience, I would say harder to learn, harder to teach, harder to implement. But and that's what you get in the real world in spades, right? If you will, quote unquote, and an entrepreneur world in particular.
So let's fast forward. I'm going to maybe skip a little bit on the Novartis side, but the Amgen digital health, right? You kind of said, one of the early days, and it's funny. I just got an email actually the other day from another pharma, right? Like, well, we need to really define what digital means, and I'm like, well, it's 2 decades later, right? And I feel like everybody should know what digital means at this point, or know what it means to that particular team, et cetera. Take us back to that, whatever decade ago or something at Amgen, to the extent that you can and want to. But like, what was that experience driving, right? Because it's, the brands want their own thing, the corporate versus, versus different countries, defining, is it standalone? So kind of a little bit of that story, right? It was fascinating to me.
Happy to. I'll try to sort of paint the picture, right? I don't think Amgen was unique by any means. It was probably typical across the industry. But at that point, digital was basically, one aspect was, let's build an app that, no one's going to ever download and ever open. And we have no back end and we don't know what actually ever happens to it. So it was just sort of like a check the box marketing activity.
And I want to just interrupt 1 second. There was one company that kind of asked to count how many apps that pharma company has. And it was like 500, something crazy like that. And I just multiplied that times what an average it would take to develop something, and I'm like, and the usage patterns are nothing, right? So think about that. Could have been like 10 startups right there, right? Like
totally.
That are focused. So
I love that. Build an app that no one ever downloads with no backend.
Exactly right. Like no data, no backend, no usage. It's like, but I got that on my resume now. So you had a lot of that. You had a lot of essentially digital was like buying ad spend, right, on websites.
Right.
Nobody was doing YouTube. Certainly, we weren't. So it's really the lens was frankly mostly around marketing, right? So it was like this kind of like extending beyond TV, radio, and going straight to the physician's office, and so that's kind of what the starting point, landscape was at the time. And so the whole notion here was, look at all these underlying trends that are happening, right? So we were talking about things like mobile, right? To say like, guys, our website is not mobile friendly. Like you literally be like, have to do this, right? Or you go to our website and you spend all this time trying to find something, right? So the example I gave, right, to Bob Bradway, who's still the CEO and great guy, and the leadership team was, I said, the US government does it better than we do. So when you go to Google and you say, I'm going on vacation, and you put mail hold, it actually takes you to a specific landing page where you can get in there, put your mail on hold, and leave the website in 30 seconds, right? If you went at that point and said on Embryl, you want to find out about copay assistance or something, right? You're like literally navigating pages and pages and pages before you find out the question you have and to get it solved. Like this, we got to pride ourselves in doing it better than the government, right? And so this was sort of the, starting by, look, we had senior executives that were on flip phones at that point still, right? I mean, again, not unusual, right? But I think that's sort of the context in which we were starting. Now the advantage I had was I was not a techie, as I said, right? Like, so I was when I got asked to explore this space, my first reaction was, did you call the wrong person? Because my assistant helps me at least twice a week with email. You know what I mean? Like, but and I think, the response was, hey, if I can figure it out, then anybody can figure it out. So I'm like, all right, I'll sort of take that. But that was a backdrop against which we started, right? And I think a bunch of lessons from that, and a lot of progress and failures is all anything entrepreneurial is. But one of the key things we learned, you gotta make it real for people, right? That whole notion of they got to see it, right? You just telling them just doesn't go. So like one of the pivotal things for us was we had talked about this whole notion of having Bluetooth in the delivery device to know if, when, where someone's taking your medication, right? And I talked about that a couple of times, and then one of our digital engineering leads, who's actually one of my co-founders at BrightInsight, he basically spent a weekend and just himself just programmed on a cap a little Bluetooth, a little whatever
signal,
when you signal, right, you took it off and the Bluetooth went to this like super simple thing on my phone that just said,
you opened it. Yeah.
Congrats. We recorded your, whatever dose. Right.
Yeah.
And again, I remember sitting in the boardroom, just passing this around the entire, team, and people being like, wow, like, that you can do that. Right. That's, then it sort of just gets the imagination going. I mean, again, it didn't like all of a sudden make everything easy to do, but those types of things, when you're driving that change are just so critical.
This you made me think about the whole cap and chip. I don't know, Jim. Did you ever know that I have a NFC chip in here?
Totally. Yeah, totally. I remember you would did you go on like CNBC or something to talk about?
Yeah. It wasn't supposed to be about
Cyborg,
that, but somehow, But Cyborg. The funny thing, because the reason I'm bringing it up, actually, we did do like a little bit of that hacking. That if you open a bottle, actually writes the data point. Because think about a patient like an Alzheimer's or somebody. Either you can actually write to the chip and somebody else can read it. I mean, again, far-fetched, but that was kind of the concept behind it.
Yeah.
But back to this, it wasn't about the tech. It's about how do people around you, leverage can help you as a patient or vice versa, right? I mean, there's still Parkinson's patients that use this actually now because of the tremble to actually open the door because they lose the keys, right? So there's still use cases on it. But anyway, carry on.
It's fascinating. But even like you saying that, like, I think if you did that same action today, you might get the same response.
Yeah.
Like, you might get the same response. Like, even though that kind of simple little Bluetooth signal going there is kind of everywhere and it's nowhere at the same time a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, personally, if you asked me 10 years ago to make a prediction where things are right now in digital health and pharma, one of the things I would have massively gotten wrong, and it was the basis of even starting BrightInsight, was that I thought by now pretty much all drug delivery devices would be connected. Right. And I'm just blown away by how
The lack of connectivity. Yeah.
lack of connectivity, and you're seeing more in the pipelines, but I mean, it's been almost a decade. Like that
Right.
has been so slow moving, and again, like I thought that would be one of the big use cases for BrightInsight, and it is an important use case. We have multiple connected drug delivery device programs going, but not nearly. The industry hasn't sort of advanced on that nearly as much as I would have thought.
Yeah.
So take us to I mean, you kind of alluded to the genesis of it, but also you alluded to you used the word pivot a couple of times, so what was the hypothesis when you started BrightInsight, and how did you guys morph? And actually maybe kind of for the listeners, viewers, what the heck do you guys do?
Yeah, what do we even do? Yeah. So we're basically the regulated digital health platform on top of which pharma and medical device companies build their regulated digital health solutions. So if you take the example of the connected drug delivery device, right? So you're going to put Bluetooth in a pen. Well, where's that data going to go? Right? It'll probably talk to an app on a patient's phone, and it's going to go to the cloud. We're that compliant platform and infrastructure, right? Where you can essentially build your app on our infrastructure, or we have an out-of-the-box app that you can configure to customize exactly what you want. But we're taking over that data, bringing it to that back-end cloud. You can run your algorithms, your insights, et cetera, right? Get that, result, if you will, back to the patient, right? And let them do their thing. So maybe give you, make it real with some of the kinds of use cases we're supporting. So a public one with CSL and Hizentra, which is a drug for primary immunodeficiency and some other rare disease indications. These patients, they have this life-changing therapy, but it's a complicated regimen where they have to be, injecting themselves and rotating the injection sites and kind of be able to record that. And many patients were literally keeping a paper journal to remember what the history was, right? And so what this app basically does is it gives them, a super UX UI friendly way to just sort of say, oh, I'm, injected myself here, yesterday I did it here, et cetera, right? So it solves a specific pain point. There's other pain points that it solves, but we help them, build that app. It's all built into their software's medical device requirements, bring that to market in 6 months. It's got 4.5 stars in the app store. 20% of patients are using that with almost no marketing. A ton of data and insights that are coming that are feeding that into how they can iterate and improve upon the solution for their patients. We have, I forget the number, of approaching maybe like 1 million recordings of ePro and hundreds of thousands of injections or something. So like real data coming through here. It's now going international, et cetera, right? And so that's just a small example on that side, right? Or an important example on that side. On the other end of the spectrum, we have companies like bioMérieux, one of the leaders in the in vitro diagnostic space, right? That are, that are building, in the ICU, in the lab, in the clinical workflow, digital solutions that are going to optimize things like their lab tests, lab equipment, et cetera, right? So we cover that whole spectrum. The commonality is that folks are solving, really important clinical problems that are either today or in the future going to put them typically in the regulated space. So our big learnings from Amgen that led to this was every one of these innovations that we did. We had a portfolio of things. We were partly reinventing the wheel because right. And so we said, gosh, why are we having to reinvent the wheel? And secondly, we said using the cloud in a compliant way. And this again, cloud obviously has matured a lot over the decade, become almost ubiquitous now. But like back then, it was still early. Was not a trivial thing, right? And so we said, let's build a platform that folks can out of the box get all of their software's medical device requirements met, right? So we support all our quality management system, support all the way up to class 3 and combination product intended use. Same thing on the data privacy and security side. So out of the box in this cybersecurity, ISO 27001, we have a list of like 20 certs or whatever. And I can't tell you how many, probably like 70, 80 audits the company's been through over the years between, bodies and our customers and stuff. So you just get that out of the box compliance. And then we've been investing a ton on all the microservices, right? Or essentially all the functionalities, right? So all the brains now can sit in the cloud. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel at the level of your app or your device every time, right? And so for our customers, get a first version, under all of the SAMD requirements to market in, call it 6 months or so, depending on the solution and the complexity. do it with a partner that's proven and trusted by, more than half of the top biopharmas in the world and many medical device leaders as well, and get global scale. We're now in 64 countries and growing. So if as a pharma and medtech company, you typically don't want to only innovate for one or two markets, right? Stuff that works, you want to scale, just like your drugs, right? And so, now we cover most of the significant markets, for pharma and medtech in a fully compliant way, right? So that's essentially what we're doing and who we do it for. Yeah.
And your view on kind of digital therapies, right? And I host that other podcast that I'm cheating on Jim on with, we talk about kind of digital therapies. They're kind of stuck between SAMD and a molecule, right? So on one side, they're treated as a molecule from a pharma perspective, and from an FDA. On the other side, it's SAMD. Talk to us a little bit about that, and maybe even touch on kind of what's your view of digital therapies going forward. Kind of, maybe you mentioned earlier something like, well, I would have gotten something wrong 10 years ago, right? So curious.
Yeah. Let me know if this gets at your question. So, if I go back to my early days at Amgen, the first year I started Amgen was the same year we hired our first head of devices, meaning physical devices, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And which is kind of crazy because every one of our drugs went into a physical device except one.
Right.
And the reason is that as an industry, we always thought of our product as the drug itself, and it kind of stopped there, and everything else was sort of ancillary
outsourced
to it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But now today, if you go to any biopharma company in the world, I can only think of maybe one exception off the top of my head. They all have a major medical device capability or drug delivery device capability, even though most of them don't actually make their own physical drug delivery devices. Why?
Sure.
Because the fundamental understanding of what is our product has changed from the drug only to the drug plus the device, right? Because you have to think about what's the formulation, what's the volume, what's going to be that route of administration, right? Is this going to be an on-body injector? Is this just going to be a simple syringe? Is it electromechanical? Is it a handheld auto injector? Do I want to put, is it one dose, every week? Is it once a month? All that, right? That innovate, that's a, in that sense, sort of a relatively now mainstream and newish capability, well entrenched capability now, right? But a decade ago, it wasn't, right? So now we've changed the definition of what a product is, right? A decade from now, my strong belief, and certainly our companies and our investors' strong belief, is that how we think about what is a product will be the drug plus the device plus digital
monitoring.
Exactly. Right. And that digital is not, I'm not talking about digital advertising. I'm talking about digital is deeply embedded in the product. Right. And the analogy in the auto industry. Right. And when we started this company, instead of buying a Tesla, I should have bought Tesla stock. I'd be much better off, but that's one of those regrets, though I do love the car. But, now nobody argues about every Toyota in the world is going to be more like a Tesla in the next 5 to 10 years, right? Like it's just like every GM, every Ford, every whatever, right? Like we all just intrinsically get it. Even 5 years ago, people were like, oh, maybe Tesla will kind of be a niche car here, or some people use it here. Like, the same thing's going to happen here, right? Like every medical device is going to be connected to the cloud because the value is just so clear if you can successfully do that and drive the value of that data, right? And so whether you're talking about hospital equipment, central lab equipment, doctor's office equipment in people's homes, wearables, implantables, smart hips, knees, neuromodulators, you name it, right? All of that, right? Because the value of that unlock is just is unbelievable, enormous, right? And we can go through that, right? And then the same thing on the drug side, actually, maybe it's a little bit less intuitive, but if you go through sort of a generic journey that you guys obviously all and probably most of your users can appreciate, but top of the funnel, is there a diagnosis problem, right? Which is again a testing plus data problem, right? So how do you diagnose at scale? Then you might have the diagnosis correct, but how do you match the right patient to the right therapy? That's also often a data plus algorithm problem, right? And then if you're now on therapy, again, how do you think about things like, is personalized drug dosing relevant? Do you need to do disease progression tracking? Do you need to do symptom tracking? Do you need to look for adverse events, right? You need to understand that disease and that therapy to figure out what are the right specific pain points that matter and are amenable to a digital solution, right? And there's a lot of technologies that can do a lot today. And then obviously with all the innovation happening on the sensor front and on the AI ML front and everything else, over time, obviously there'll be more and more technology available to do even more. But just today, there's tons of technology that let you solve very meaningful pain points in big ways that drive huge clinical value and massive commercial value, right? And so coming back to your question, right? I think what we see and often advise customers is to say, look, unless you really have it figured out, you got that amazing, algorithm that you should wrap right around your drug and take it to the FDA and get a class 3 SAMD approval for the algorithm. And we're working on use cases like that, and that absolutely is the right answer. But for the majority, you would say, look, the crawl, walk, run, right? Which is, hey, like what I talked about with the Hizentra use case. You have a good understanding of the pain points. Let's build the app. Let's do it in the right way. Let's collect the data on the back end. Let's start the iterative process on what pain points are you solving well? What other pain points could you solve? How do you iterate and improve upon that? Get that data. And over time, the journey then can take you into that software as medical device space, right? So let's say you're in a space where you're, again, doing disease progression tracking. Okay, well, over time, you collect enough data. Well, now you might have an algorithm that helps determine if the patient's doing well or needs a change in therapy or whatever it might be, right? Over time, you get the data and you might be able to predict, an adverse event that, before it happens or before it worsens, right? So you got to start the journey with where you're ready to start it today. But it's, again, over time, I think we're going to see many disease areas move into drug plus device plus digital that really creates a combination product, right? And I think a decade from now, you're going to see, let me put it this way, some of the most forward-thinking customers we have are already thinking that, hey, I have a drug that today is X billions of dollars, it's going to grow, and we have a patent life. Before the end of that patent life, how do I get enough data, enough algorithms built so that my life cycle management is, the drug itself goes off therapy, but I got so much intelligence and algorithms wrapped around it, right? Smart delivery, smart algorithms, that a generic just can't compete.
Right. And just playing off of this, like I'm in that space. But one of the things I see is that if you say, look at we look at like Europe, you look at like what's happening, going out towards Asia, and then you look at the States, and States is the source of innovation a lot of times. So there's a lot of investment and scale and venture money that goes into it. But you've got these, you've got such an aggressive regulatory environment that are blocking the digital connectivity. Like there's a reason why that Bluetooth device never got in, because pharma companies are forced to leave the data locally on the phone. The OIG steps in and says, I'm not comfortable with you providing a device directly because you're getting paid so much on the compensation for the pharmaceutical product. So you kind of have this tension that's happening right now. What's your, does that eventually break through and they just have to say, hey guys, the value of this digital connectivity is so big that the regulatory changes? And in some ways they're not incentivized to evolve it, because if you're getting 90, like you were saying, we have a, would you say our technology is not as good as the government's, but that's the government doesn't have a 90% gross margin, So So what's your prediction? Does that break? Does that break, or does it, or is it people like Brightline and companies like, we're doing that kind of provide that middle layer?
BrightInsight.
BrightInsight, sorry.
No, all good. So always hard to predict, but I'll tell you sort of what I'm seeing and what I think could be some of the things that sort of catalyze and put us on that, on that inflection point. So one is, we are much closer today, just because we're working on it with customers, on use cases that I think will demonstrate that clear clinical and business impact at scale, that others will say, gosh, we got to do that. Otherwise we're not going to be able to compete. Right. And it'll start in a couple of therapeutic area pockets, and then, that'll force the building of the muscle. So there's nothing like sort of competition, FOMO, whatever you want to call it, ultimately, right. That drives, but someone's got to break through and get there. And I think there's multiple disease areas where we believe there's programs that really have that opportunity, to kind of just create those wins, right? And nothing like wins to galvanize people across the chasm. I think the second possibility is, and I say it over and over. I've had this conversation with Mark Bertolini, who used to be the CEO of Aetna, as I'm sure most of you guys know, is one of our advisors. is that the payers really have a chance to be to catalyze the disruption here, right? So if I were the CEO, magic wand, my next job, I become CEO of a major payer, I would be saying, why do we continue to pay for stuff
Right.
that we're not seeing the proof point on the value, right? And so the fact that we still live in a world where the clinical trial data is sufficient for real world reimbursement at the level of billions of dollars, when the technology exists to measure and show at the level of individual patients, right? So I'm not talking about sort of real world evidence where we got all this data from a couple of EMRs and claims and, really smart people, mathematicians analyze it and kind of, that's good.
Right.
But we have the technology to say at the level of every single patient, what's going on with this therapy, right? At a minimum, if today you get paid for when the script is filled at Walgreens or wherever, especially Pharma, you can easily move to, can I at least get paid for when I show that the patient took it? So that's better, right? And then you can move up the stack to say, look, maybe we can't measure direct efficacy in a cost-effective and clinically effective way, but you can easily probably come up with lots of proxies, right? That's still better, right? I mean, so a lot of times, people use the excuse of the perfect for not making sort of progress that can get you 99% of the way there, right? I was, I was leading a conversation at DTX East last week, and one of our ecosystem partners that we announced is, Zelf. They do some pretty cool stuff. You guys should talk to them as well, in case you don't know. But they were talking, they work with health systems and try to bring digital innovation into them. And they were talking about how they had a solution on, I believe it was on the pregnancy side, and it would automatically deliver to a patient some education, for them from like after they left their visit to like, and they would get it like the next morning or something.
Right.
And one of the health systems was pushing back and saying, well, what if that patient is not pregnant the next morning because, some unfortunate event happens? And of course that's going to happen. If you go to 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, by definition, you're going to have that happen. But should really that edge use case stop this incredibly powerful, impactful, presumably impactful, important innovation, or education to be put in the hands of the patients at the right time for the right needs, for the other 99.99%, right? And so you got to have to get through this. Anyway, I get sidetracked, but I think frankly, payers should step up and could really catalyze this. And in the context of all the things we talk about with, increasing prices and healthcare costs and so forth. So I think that's, a second opportunity. And look, and then the third one is, again, if I were the magic wand and the CEO of a pharma company, I would say, let me take one or two of my assets, right, that aren't going to make or break the company's market cap, and just go all in, right? Go all in, because the lessons to learn are so important. Right. And so if you're sitting now as the CEO of Ford or Toyota or you name whichever Tesla competitor, well, first of all, those CEOs aren't CEOs anymore because Tesla did Tesla and they did it. But if you were, you'd be like, gosh, don't I wish I took a division?
More risk.
Right? And more risk, right? And I think trying to peanut butter, again, for my little consulting hat back on, so people can throw virtual, fruit at me or whatever it is, but we see so many of our clients are trying to peanut butter their way through digital transformation. And that's really hard.
Love it.
Really hard, right? Instead, pick an asset and go end to end and just reimagine that entire thing end to end. Right. And that means the lawyers, the compliance, the reimbursement, the regulatory, the device, the marketing, like everything.
And create a framework
the right
for
leader
yourself.
And just blow up the whole thing and pick an asset that's not going to kill your market cap, even if you goose egg the whole thing, why not? Like that's the fastest way to success, in my opinion.
I love it. Love it.
Love it. You know, it's funny on the DTX podcast, I always ask the guests, like, what advice would you give to, and fill in the blank, a pharma executive, et cetera. So I think, Jim, your question back to Kal now, or the famous Jim Joyce question, will be a super fun one. Well, I'm looking forward to the answer. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So answer. I'll land it to you, Jim.
So go back in time. So you're now, you're hopping on a plane and you're going to kind of not DTX West, but you're going to DTS, Midwest. So you're ending up in Chicago you're meeting up with some of your old friends, and you're in there and you're you're at the, was it University of Chicago? You're on the University of Chicago campus walking with some friends, and a young kind of aspiring entrepreneur that had been at Boston Consultancy Group and had just survived his tenure at a pharmaceutical company implementing digital health Bluetooth products. And he's gone in there and he says, like, Kal, I can't believe it's you. And you look at this young version of yourself. What's that one piece of advice would you give this young entrepreneur as he's launching his new digital health company?
Yeah, that's the hardest. The hardest part of your question is one, right? It's like you could write a book on 100 things that So
don't peanut butter it on us. Don't peanut butter on us.
Right. Look, let me. I'll sort of take it this way, and again, happy to reboot the question if it doesn't get at it. Like, I think there's so much insecurity in the world, and there's so much insecurity in me as well. And I think people who are driven to achieve often come with that sort of deeply embedded. And so if I could go back and have sort of root cause that out of my ethos, personality, background, whatever, I would do that, because not because necessarily that I would have made different choices. I mean, if you read like Daniel Pink's latest book on regret or whatever, like, I've lived like 7 or 8 careers. Like, I have like zero regrets of like having tried and gone deep on a lot of things. I loved it. Each one of those were incredibly fulfilling. I would not have skipped I would not have skipped medical school, business school, BCG, Novartis, Amgen, all the roles there, et cetera, Dr. Namen, like none of it. Like, but I think I would have been a heck of a lot more confident, present, enjoyed the journey, and not just been so focused on where that step needed to get me to. Because I actually truly believe at the end of the day, it's the journey is probably going to be more important than the destination, right? And I would say the same thing about BrightInsight. Like, I think we will be a incredibly important company in the digital health transformation, and an important partner for pharma and medical device companies, hopefully forever, as the platform, de facto platform to build these regulated software solutions of today and the future. But I always tell the team, like, guys, it's the journey matters as much or more, right? Because when you get there, you don't want to have regret on how you got there, right?
Awesome.
Love it.
Confident, present, and enjoy the journey. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. That's
awesome.
Isn't that what life's about at the end of the day, right? Like, all the other stuff just becomes irrelevant one day.
That's
exactly.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Well, Kal, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
And we'll, for all the listeners and viewers, hit subscribe, pass it on, and see you next week. And we finished off our season 11. By the way, Jim, I just
congrats!
realized
You closed us out. That was a strong close.
That was it.
Strong close.
Yeah,
strong
exactly.
Close.
Strong close.
Cool. That's an honor. Thank you, guys.
All
Thanks,
right.
Kal.
Cheers, all.
All right. Take care.
That's